Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the TraxionGG podcast, where we talk about sim racing, racing esports, and racing video games. And today we're going to be discussing the transition from the virtual world to the real world with Max Esterson. I'm Tom and I'll be speaking to him, but also so will be Piers Prior. Piers, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to chatting to Max. I have met Max in the real world with iRacing GV3, so I've seen him around and about, but it'd be good to hear about his virtual racing background in a bit more detail.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on, I think, your second Traxion podcast, but Piers, you're also recognised from the YouTube channel in general, and you're the ideal candidate to speak to Max as well, because you work together on a weekend. Yeah,
of course. I've mentioned I've met Max a few times, and that's because I'm the co-commentator and co-presenter for the GB3 Championships, which now Max races in this year, but also raced in last year. So yeah, I've been very aware of what he's been doing in the real motor racing. But yeah, as I said, I know he's got a background in sim racing, and it'll be good to hear about what he's got to say about that firsthand.
Yeah, this is a key thing with this interview. It's the transition from virtual to motorsport. And if you've seen the Gran Turismo movie recently, which is based upon a true story of Jan Mardenborough doesn't really race at the minute, although he's looking for a 2024 seat. He is someone who's doing it in their own way without going through a competition of sorts. He's earning it, and he's got iRacing sponsorship on board as well. So I'll be fascinated to hear what he says. So without further ado, here's our chat with Max Esterson. Okay, Max Esterson, a pleasure to speak to you. We're going to talk about your motorsport career. You're currently in GB3 and your aspirations of where to go next, and also sim racing, because I know you have an affiliation with iRacing. Before we get going, I suppose to start with, myself and Piers, we'd just like to know more about your journey so far, please. So let's go way back, right from the start. Any motorsport connections in your family?
Yeah, so my dad was an engineer in the sport in the 80s. A bit in the UK designing F3 cars for Ralt, and then and then a bit later on did some race engineering in the US, and then he stopped that, and then since then we've just had friends in the sport and have always been fans. So that's kind of how it all started. Like that's our family sport that's on TV. So like that's what it was growing up.
Right. Okay. So because your father was in the business, I'm sure you would pick up some connections, but also, is that where sort of your interest would come from as well, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I initially didn't think it was something I'd end up doing, but I've always been a fan. And yeah. And when you know people in the business and competing, it makes it more interesting to watch, I guess, and to root for them.
Yeah, of course, Max, you race in the real world now, obviously in GB3, but I think you've done quite a lot of sim racing. Did you start out in the real world or in sim racing?
Yeah, I started completely on the sim. I mean, I grew up in Manhattan in New York City, so like racing isn't like the easiest thing to do there, really. So yeah, I was on the sim starting, I think, when I was 10, and just for fun, really. I think I started on the EA Sports F1 like 99 to 02 game, like we randomly.
Oh yeah.
Which I guess came out the year I was born, but
yeah,
started on there maybe a bit before I was 10, maybe 6 or 7, and then I think when I was 10 or 11, I got into iRacing, again just for fun. It was actually my older brother who got gifted like a Logitech G25 steering wheel set for his birthday or something, and then I seemed to take it over quickly. And then, kind of, escalated from there. Like, I think when I was 13 or 14, I started realizing I was like quite good on iRacing and started practicing more and taking it more seriously. And then by the time, 2018, 2019, I reached like the pro level on there in the GT3 series that they had at the time. And yeah, I did all the major events, like all the major endurance events. And yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I see. So just to be clear then, unlike, I suppose, most people who might be competing in GB3 right now against, they might have done karting at that sort of age, but you were on sims and iRacing and old EA Formula 1 games. So was there any karting at that point in the formative years, or not? Or is it just virtual?
Not until I think 2 or 3 months before my 16th birthday, which was my first time in a real kart. I mean, yeah, the occasional like indoor hire karting for fun before that, but nothing serious, until I was almost 16. So it was quite late.
Yeah, that's it's, as you say, it's fairly unusual in a lot of the drivers on the single-seated ladder. I've done a lot of karting. You clearly enjoyed, and you mentioned you enjoyed doing sim racing and iRacing. But what do you enjoy about it most?
Just like how high the level is on there, and the fact that you can test stuff repeatedly in the same condition that spoils you compared to real life. It's hard to have that. You don't have that luxury. But yeah, the level is just so high, and it's impressive how good it's gotten. Even like kind of during the years, like during COVID, I didn't play as much, and that's when everyone was playing. And the level now it's out of control in iRacing.
So what does it take in your mind to become one of those drivers at the pinnacle of iRacing? I believe at some point in your career you were in the top 35, 40, something like this. Yeah. So what does it take to get there?
I think one of the things that's like underestimated is your ability to like practice effectively without getting burned out. Very easy, I think, when you're spending hours on there to just kind of be doing laps without thinking or without being, productive. I think the top guys can do, the long hours while still being focused and still, being productive and chipping away at it. Because the problem is it's a blessing and a curse that the practice is unlimited. I mean, it's, the top guys are practicing and they can do it a lot, which is good and bad, obviously. But so you have to be able to practice effectively, I think, is key.
And that sort of deliberate practice is hugely important and potentially helped yourself into the real world. But of course, at some point you went from the sim to the real world. How did that happen? When did that happen? Just talk to us about, that transition.
Yeah, so the karting thing first was just like a summer camp in New York State that I went to, and then I realized it was fun. And then the following year in 2019, I did just a year of, like low-level club karting at that same track I did the camp at. And then, it was difficult. Like, it wasn't natural for me, karting. Obviously, I didn't do any kart sim or any of that stuff. So it wasn't quite the same as driving a car on the sim. But then at the end of 2019, I did a test in a Formula Ford in the US, and it felt, I felt much more at home. Like, it was much closer to the sim than a kart. And then I did the following year is obviously COVID, so it was a bit kind of disjointed, but I did a couple of races of Formula Ford in the US. And then at the end of that year, I came over to the UK to do some Formula Ford. And then that's kind of what sparked the next year. Then obviously in 2022, I ended up doing GB3.
Okay, interesting. So actually the transition in 2019 to doing some motor racing, and then with 2020 COVID a bit weird. So I want to touch upon 21 before we touch GB3, which is a Formula Ford season in the UK, right? Which was incredibly successful. Walter Hayes Trophy, for example. So that was that your first full season of motorsport?
Yeah, 2020 was close to a full season, but not really.
Right, okay.
But it was my first real full season of, proper testing and proper racing. So it was a lot of fun. I think I did 70 days in the car that year from like April to November. So like Formula Ford is the only place in the UK that you can do that. It was great.
So I guess less iRacing in that year because you spent.
Yeah. With that much time in the real car, when I got home, I was ready for a break from racing.
Yeah, and of course you did some Formula Ford, but then last year, I know, having commentated and presented a bit of it, you made the switch to GB3, and it was actually really successful, I thought, first season in the championship. You got a win and stuff. Talk to us about the transition both from Formula Ford to GB3 in terms of like the scale of the championship, but also the actual driving itself. And is there anything you could learn on the sim about that?
Yeah, it was definitely a big step up. I think at most circuits in the UK, the GB3 car was 15 plus seconds quicker than the Formula Ford. So it's night and day. And it's completely different. Like, you have so much grip compared to the Formula Ford where you're always sliding. And the GB3 car, the car's stuck for the most part. So yeah, it was a big change. And then physically, it was a huge change. Like to be in like good shape, they're hard cars to drive physically, and yeah, so it was quite a big change. But yeah, on the sim, to be honest, like my whole time on iRacing was almost, I would say 99% in GT cars, which is kind of funny. It's like I never really did any single seater stuff on iRacing. And then I've never driven a GT car in real life now. So it's yeah, it's a bit funny that way. But I think just at the time on iRacing, the GT racing was just more competitive, and that was kind of the focus. But yeah, it was super helpful to know all the circuits anyway, you know, from the sim from years back, just to have that. And then yeah, just driving like competition wise, like just the pressure of competing and racing was helpful.
I suppose something must have worked because it was a good year, I would say.
Yeah,
and you had a race win. How would you summarize that season?
Yeah, considering it was a rookie year, from a bigger step up than most, because most probably came from F4 or were in their second year in GB3. So yeah, it was good, and was with a small team. So, but we kind of knew from testing, like it had been going well, and we were hopeful that it would go well. I mean, it wasn't the smoothest; it was a bit up and down, but yeah, to get a win was really good. And I think there were a lot of races I showed like that I was kind of in the top 3 or 4 of that year.
But last season, you didn't just race in GB3. You had a trip back to Formula Ford, and you did the Formula Ford Festival, and that went pretty well by all accounts. You know, where would you rank that sort of win on the road sort of in your career so far? Is it up there with the GB3 win? Is it above it? What about your sim racing successes? Where do you sort of place everything?
I think the festival is above them all, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, after 2021, when I did the festival, like that one kind of haunted me for a year. Like, yeah, I dominated the first half of that weekend, and then had a disaster in the semi-final where I went from like 1st to 7th in 8 laps or something. And then you finish 7th, that means you're starting 13th or 14th for the final. And then even then, I managed to finish 2nd, starting 13th at Brands Hatch, which is like almost unheard of. And I was a 10th away from winning. So that was a bit painful. So yeah, to win it the next year was good. And to dominate the whole weekend. Obviously the final was cut short, but yeah, if anyone was going to win that weekend, it was, I was on pole by 8/10 or something, and then, won both the heat and the semi. So
yeah, a great confidence boost, I'm sure. And of course that was sort of rounded out 22, and then it's 23. You've changed teams in GB3, and I think it's been documented it's not been as successful as you would have hoped. But do you want to talk to us about the year so far?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Fortec this year, and like I've loved our time together so far. Like they've been great. Just I don't know, if anything could go wrong, it has gone wrong, really. Yeah. One of those. I think we're really close in testing, and we've shown some glimpses of speed, but yeah, when it matters, something seems to break randomly, or someone runs into me. So it's been frustrating. And
that's, I suppose, one of the main differences between the sim and reality is, of course, in the simulator you mentioned earlier on, everything is repeatable and exactly the same every time. Whereas in real life, there's a lot more variables and things that can go wrong. Is that something you've kind of had to get used to as well?
A little bit, but I've had my fair share of hardware failures and internet dropouts on the sim. So I guess that's kind of the equivalent to something breaking on the car. But this year's been like a bit extreme with how many things have happened. But I don't know. We're staying positive. We're having fun. So we'll see what we can do in the last 3 events. We'll just try to win some races.
Well, best of luck with those final few rounds, and a few wins would be certainly a great way of rounding out the season. I just wanted to flip back to sim a little bit and iRacing, because I've seen, was it last year or earlier this year, iRacing teased, what looked like a Formula Ford, and my colleague Ross McGregor wrote an article saying, they're going to tease this thing, and it could be this, and it was a picture of you that he'd taken at Knock Hill in a Formula Ford. It was raining, obviously, because Scotland. and you have iRacing on the side of the Formula Ford. So I just wanted to touch upon, what does iRacing do to support you?
Yeah, they've been great to me ever since, I think, the first time I did the festival 2020, they came on board, and yeah, we've obviously had a good relationship. And I think, you know, I'm a good story for them, because that's where I started, and, you know, I've made it pretty far up to this point. But yeah, it's been great working with them, and yeah, to have the Formula Ford on there is very cool. And I'm glad people get to enjoy that car, because it's my favorite car I've ever driven. Even, you know, it's maybe not the most glamorous or quickest, but it's the most fun I've had in a car.
Yeah, they do look really good fun to drive. We also earlier on touched on the fact that it's a bit unusual that you haven't done a huge amount of karting or racing before you went from basically iRacing straight into cars and, you know, forging a career in motorsport. But having that slightly different grounding, does that give you some advantages over some of your competitors? And are there also some disadvantages? You know, where do you think it's helped you, and where do you think maybe you're lacking a little bit of something here and there that you've had to learn a bit more than your competitors?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of helping, I think just knowing the circuits from such a young age, like without having to even think about them, has been super helpful, because I've been driving around Spa since I was 11.
It's really that similar, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's spot on, really. Yeah, then also just like the ability to do so many repetitions, I think, is huge. And just like getting this general feel of braking at like such a young age and doing it so many times is good. I guess disadvantages would be, I think, karting so many years, you build up like a good physical kind of strength, you know, like race fitness, which is helpful. I think I struggled a bit at the start of last year, because Formula Ford, they're quite easy physically to drive. So jumping into the GB3 at first was a bit difficult. So I think when these kids do 10 years of karting, they build up, you know, a nice kind of race fitness. Then I guess another advantage for iRacing is I saved a lot of money. I've saved my parents.
That's a good point. That's a very, very good point, actually. It's something that a lot of people in motorsport will know. Tom?
Well, yeah, I was going to ask about if there are any, you know, we touched upon a lot of the advantages and the cool story of coming from sim racing, but are there any disadvantages? And you mentioned there the physical side. Through decades of karting, you can build up certain muscles. Anything else that you felt you were maybe lacking or had to learn quickly versus those who had a longer career in cars or karts before you jumped in?
Yeah, I suppose rain driving, but maybe that'll change soon on iRacing.
Yes. Well, the pictures look amazing. So
yeah, they look good. I didn't drive in the rain until I was 16, so in a kart. So yeah, that was a bit different. Where, you know, people who are karting in the UK or Europe, ages 15, have, you know, they've done plenty in the rain.
Especially in the UK.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, looking forward to seeing rain in iRacing soon, hopefully. Constant teasers, looking forward to it. It sounds fundamentally groundbreaking from what's been described, if it's delivered in that way. Outside of motorsport, do you still iRace?
Not as much as I used to, but I'm trying to get back into it. It's hard when you've kind of not been full on focused on it for like 2 or 3 years. It's definitely harder to like get up to the level I was at before. But I think, you know, this winter and in the coming months, I'll try to make a push. So it's still, when I get back into it, I realize how much fun it is. And then besides that, like just how good it is mentally. Like even if I'm driving Porsche Cup, say like just the official races, like the competition and the nerves are the same, you know, as the real thing, like real single-seater racing. Like when you're sitting on the grid, it's, you know, the heart's going. So it's definitely good training from that standpoint.
100%. I've had that. I feel like I get more nervous for sim races than I do for real races.
Yeah, I mean, the start of a 24-hour race on iRacing, like, yeah, it's nerve-wracking.
And when your foot's jumping on the pedal, I've had that in the sim. I've never had that in real life. But back to your real racing career. Of course, last year and this year, your main focus has been GB3, but you didn't just do GB3 this year. You had a one-off excursion, I believe, in the FIA F3 Championship, which must have been pretty cool. First of all, tell us a bit about that, and is that what you're planning to do next year?
Yeah, it was really cool. It was kind of unexpected. Someone dropped out kind of last minute, and there was an availability to jump in. And I think it was wise to take it because you don't have, many opportunities to kind of learn about the series and learn what it is before, the full season starts. So yeah, it was a good experience. Luckily, the first one was Silverstone, so I knew the circuit well, probably better than most of the other drivers, which was good. And I think it showed in the first practice when I was 10th, which was quite nice. Obviously, I used an extra set of tires, but still to be 10th, I think in that grid, my first 5 laps in the car was good. Yeah, it's super tricky with the way the tires work in that car and series. So like half the battle is, tire warm up and where you are in sequence and traffic and getting used to all that. The actual driving aspect in F3 is a very small portion, unfortunately, but it's the way it is. And obviously that's a skill some have mastered.
So you mentioned, of course, potentially the next rung is FIA F3. The logical progression would be then F2 and potentially F1. But is that where you want to be, or have you got other aspirations?
Ultimately, yes. Like F1 would be the goal. Obviously, I know it's very tricky to get there, no matter who you are. But yeah, for now, like I just want to keep climbing the ranks in single seaters in Europe is the immediate goal. But in the end, if that doesn't land me in F1, I'd be, very happy in IndyCar or sports cars in Europe or the US, just driving, professionally. I like driving.
Yeah, amen to that. And, it's good to have, I suppose, an open mind because, a lot of drivers on the GB3 especially and, have aspirations for Formula One, but it's good to keep your options open.
I very much hope you can make those upper echelons of open wheel or single seater motorsport. I think that'll be amazing, not just for yourself, but for sim races as well as like a goal or a pin-up. Oh, look, this person made it. So I was just going to ask to finish off, for other people who are doing very well iRacing, put a lot of hours in and are competitive at the minute, do you think your career shows that they can progress into motorsport? And do you think that will hopefully furrow a path for other iRacers who might want to try and take up like Formula Ford or karting, for example?
Yeah, I hope so. I think it's definitely possible. And I think, Max Verstappen has been talking about it a lot recently, like how he's trying to start this GT3 program with sim racers. And, I think there's an interview a while ago where he's saying how impressive it is, like how close they're driving, the sim drivers who have never driven a kart or whatever, a real car, how close their driving is to like the real thing. And at like with no experience in the real thing, they're already like at a good base level of like knowledge and, how to set up a car. And I think, it's cool to see him also, being on the sim so much and competing. It's super impressive. And yeah, I think it's definitely the way of the future. I mean, karting is very expensive and it's a lot, it's a lot of money, a lot of time, effort. Not that sim racing isn't a lot of time and effort, but it's karting is definitely difficult. So I think the sim is becoming more and more relevant, obviously, whether it leads to sim racers getting sim, driver roles at professional teams or getting in the real thing. I think the pathways are opening, which is good.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way, doesn't it? And hopefully more opportunities are coming in the future. Well, Max, I just want to say thank you very much for your time and best of luck with your future endeavours in motorsport.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks to Max for his time and thank you very much for listening or watching. Piers, did you enjoy that conversation?
Yeah, it was great to chat to Max once again and interesting to hear about how his experience differs from quite a lot of his competitors who most of which have done karting since they were younger and now they're, racing against him. But he's done most of his practice and learning on the sim and is now able to apply it in real life. And it was just interesting to hear about what he's been up to, what successes he's had. And yeah, he just seems like a nice guy and someone that's sort of really advocating sim racing.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to speak to. And we gained some really valuable insights there of the advantages, but also some of the disadvantages from going from sim to car, as opposed to like a decade of karting first. Where do you think he'll end up next?
Well, it sounds like he's got his eyes on FIA F3 Championship, and I don't see why he wouldn't be doing that next year. He mentioned that this year in GB3 with Fortec hasn't been the year that he maybe potentially wanted it to be, but he's shown the speed, he's shown he's got the pace, he's got some experience in FIA F3 under his belt now with that Silverstone race which came about, which I'm sure will hold him a good stead for next year. And who knows what the future holds, but we may see him in the F3 and F2 going forward, and then if he can get to F1, amazing, and that would be great for sim racing, but if not, he'll be a very solid racing driver in whatever he drives, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, we wish him the best of luck because he's a nice person, but also he's very talented. You don't win those Formula Ford races or a race in GB3 for nothing. So he's clearly got the talent. Those cars are all extremely equal. And then also, from a sim racing perspective, it's great to have sort of this pin-up who can hopefully succeed in open wheeler or single-seater racing. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Thank you very much for listening and watching. As I said already, please do subscribe on YouTube or leave a comment on YouTube or the website if you want to wish Max the best with his future motorsport endeavors. But also, if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please do rate and subscribe on there. It helps us out, helps us make more episodes in the future. But that's it for now. Thank you very much to Piers as well. Keep it pinned.